Well, good morning. We're in the final 3 months of the year. It's absolutely crazy. Good morning. I'm Arye Kellman, Chief Creative Officer of TILT, and welcome to a Financial Mail Redzone Arena Events webcast this morning. We've been doing them all year long as webcasts. It's crazy to think that last year we'd never done a webcast before, but this is the new normal. But as we start to move in towards 2021 and the Christmas decorations go up and whether people see them at the shops or not remains in question, we have to start asking the question, well, what's next in this new normal? We now have the advantage of a little bit of time spent with COVID-19, this global pandemic, but what does it mean for the marketing community in South Africa moving into 2021? This morning, we've got CMOs in conversation and we're asking the question, well, what's next? These are the people that are busy putting the brand plans together right now, signing off the budgets, having the media owners fight for their share of the pie in this new normal. But really, what is next? And this morning, joined by a phenomenal panel, kicking it off with a Consulting Chief Marketing Officer, Danny Dixon, Marketing Director of Kellogg South Africa, Avik Sarkar, and Cabe Molo, Head of Marketing at African Bank, as well as Neo Makele, Chief Strategy Officer at Ogilvy. Now, I want to come to you first. You have the CMOs coming in and out of the Zoom rooms. How are the CMOs of South Africa doing in this new normal?
I swore that I wouldn't be the first to talk about muting in the button. I think the year has been tough, and I think what COVID did was put added pressure on South Africa's CMOs. I think CMO, the role globally, has seen so many challenges. The role had to pivot so many times. There's added pressure of different kinds of consumers, different people who own consumers. So you've got the chief, digital officer or tech officer owning the consumer. You've got, marketing owning the consumer. Sometimes you even have the CEO owning the consumer and the COO owning the consumer. So it created so much tension in the role of the CMO. Add now COVID. And while you're adding COVID, don't forget #Black Lives Matter and the diversity issue in a very unequal South Africa. So who really owns the consumer? Who can narrate what the consumer needs? So there's the complexity of the role, there's the complexity of the landscape, because I think an optimal CMO has the pressure of navigating data and analytics, navigating the multiple media landscape. And then you've got uncertainty. And now the CMOs have to plan for growth in a market like ours. It's a tough job. So I do think with that understanding, how does one plan for 2021?
It's a big question, Mr. Molo, Head of Marketing at African Bank. I mean, there was a time when we could only walk between 6 and 9 in the morning. There was a time when the people that work for African Bank had to get clearances to be able to go to the office, the sort of core team of bankers that make sure that all the nuts and bolts actually function. It's insane to think that that was just a couple of months ago. But when you operationally are figuring out how do we as a bank work and give people what they need in this new normal, how do you then begin to market what that operational value proposition is when the operations itself are changing so rapidly?
Thanks, Arya. Good morning, everyone. Great question. And interestingly, even though we are at level 1, we're still not back to normal. I don't know whether we'll ever get back to normal. You spoke about new normal. But even now, our operations aren't at 100% capacity because it's not really allowed. Within the branch network, you still have screens, you still have people in masks. We still see that people coming into the branches aren't as many as possible, or as many as they used to be. And yet at the same time, we're not necessarily seeing that huge move to digital that perhaps people thought would happen because it makes sense. I think there's still a lot that people are understanding about how South African consumers still love that face-to-face interaction. So you still have to bear that in mind while saying, okay, let's increase digital. You also have to look at what is the business that is now making more and more sense. There was a time when I think we thought that, okay, things are becoming tight. Maybe people will start by trying to borrow money so that they've got something in their back pockets. But we actually saw people prefer to save more money and make sure that they have perhaps what they know that they have. Let's save that, and let's not incur any future costs because we have no idea what is coming up. And yet, even within that, you still got a world that says, but we need to rebuild this economy, we need to re-stimulate it, and we need money that perhaps people don't have. People need to borrow so that they can actually do that. And lastly, I think to what Nell also touched on, it's crazy how talking to consumers is also changing. I'm very much a traditional marketer, so digital and tech is, yes, part of the marketing landscape, but for me, it is not the end all and be all. Because as we've seen now during COVID and during lockdown, the traditional above the line mediums, TV, radio, still play a huge part. Yes, digital is part of that, but it's not what I think people thought previously, that we were getting into an or conversation about media. It will either be TV or digital. It's definitely an and conversation. It's TV and digital and multiple screens, not just my phone, but also maybe my iPad and multiple digital environments. And to what you also started with, Arya, we can't do our activations in the malls anymore because number one, people aren't there, but number two, people's headspace is not, I want to hang out in the mall. I want to get in the mall, do what I'm there to do, and leave. So we definitely have to be thinking along all of those different variables and still think, but what is coming? In some places in the country, it doesn't look like we've ever experienced lockdown. In some places, we're still under level 5 lockdown. So again, we have to be very clear about the different markets, the different audiences, and how best to engage with that consumer, especially from where their headspace is and what then they need, what are their requirements in terms of those products or those propositions that we offer.
Kayebe is bringing lots of different sort of topics to the fore here. You know, one thinks back to marketing 2A with the marketing mix and the 17 Ps and all of these different elements that make up what marketing is, and doing an incredible job there of unpacking what the new consumer looks like. Vic, I want to come to you because you have an added layer in that you are the marketing director for Kellogg South Africa, but you're not in South Africa to be the marketing director. You're doing everything remotely and digitally. So as this new consumer is coming to the fore, you're not sort of on the ground, which is an added layer. But I mean, in this new world, what is the role of geographies when everybody's connecting on Zoom and marketers are sort of creating their plans using video conferencing?
Hi, Arya. Good morning, everybody. An interesting question. I think there are very few people in this world who have taken a role change exactly in the middle of the pandemic. And I have never visited South Africa, for that matter. I've never visited Africa as a continent. So I have no idea exactly how the country looks, except for the YouTube and the TVs and whatever photos I have seen in the past. Now, that's an interesting take, but that's where the challenge lies. And that's the challenge which I had taken up, right? In marketing, it's very important that everything is consumer focused, right? And we need to understand consumers, not in terms of the behavior, but more in terms of the culture. And that is where the marketing starts. We need to ensure that we hit consumers where we are relevant culturally. Only then they will accept us as a brand and we'll be able to enter the household. Now, to start with, a challenge where I'm in Dubai and working for South Africa, the first thing which I did is actually went ahead and read the book Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. Now that for me was the starting point. And trust me, and that gave me a huge perspective in terms of what South Africa is all about. And his entire journey, and you guys are already aware of him, he's a big person right now, but his entire journey was an amazing read for that matter. And a lot of stuff which I had in mind changed while I was reading his life and the way he was born and the way he was brought up. Now, that was a big change and a big transformational change in my journey. Second, I think it goes without saying. Now, be it you're a marketing director or you're the CEO or you're the finance director, the one thing which is very, very important and very core to the consumers and people of South Africa, which I've realized so far, is trust. So I actually had to trust 100% with my team and to the entire cross-functional organization who are based out of South Africa right now. Very easy for me as a marketing director to tell them that, okay, fine, this is not okay, but go ahead with a plan like this. And they will obviously go ahead with what I say. But very difficult as a marketing director to learn from your juniors and from your cross-functional people. So I came in as a person who was ready to accept and learn more than dictate. So these are the few changes which I made. And I think it really helped me a lot. Because right now and for the future, and I think my panelists will also agree, we talk about the 4 Ps of marketing. That's what we have studied a lot, right? But I was just going through a few articles in the last 1 month, and I realized there were the 3 A's of marketing. It's about being agile, it's about being adaptable, and it's about being ambiguous. Because we really don't know how life will be tomorrow. Forget the next quarter or forget the next year, right? And the big thing is how agile you are as a marketer, and therefore how easily you're able to connect to the change in consumer behavior, which is changing rapidly. Earlier, maybe a decade back, behaviors were changing in months' time, in a year's time. Right now, behavior is changing on a daily basis. And the third is being ambiguous. There's a lot of ambiguity. And then we know that we really don't know when the level of lockdown will come down to 0. When Corona will wave us goodbye and leave the earth, we have no idea. And there's a lot of repercussion in terms of employment, in terms of disposable income, in terms of GDP, a lot of background repercussion, which eventually hits the consumer and the FMCG sector in a big, big way. So I think these are the few things which I had in mind.
I love that. Agility, adaptability, and ambiguity. But, when we speak on these webcasts, it seems like these are quite easy things to change. And we forget that there are ecosystems within marketing teams, within brands. There is a brand planner that has been buying out of home for 10 years. She has the relationship with the company, and that's what she does, and that's what she wants to do. There's an events coordinator who's been coordinating events in real life. There's an activations company. I mean, these are huge amounts of people. We see it when we're on emails and suddenly there's CC'd in 16 different people and you're like, I've never met any of these people in my life before. So Danny, I want to come to you because, it's one thing for a CMO to say, cool, we're going to pivot, we're going to shift this direction, we're going to be agile, adaptable, ambiguous, all of these things. But then there's all these layers underneath them. And perhaps we're living in a day and age where we need to relook how that works. Can somebody still be an on-the-ground events planner in 2021 as we move forward, or are organizations going to have to restructure what marketing teams and units look like?
Hi, I think there's a hybrid. There's somewhere in the middle rather than a total restructure. I think to what all the other panelists were speaking about earlier, there is massive challenge. There is massive amounts of change, and marketing does lead the change, and is always a good reflection of where the company's at and what the company's strategy is. So I think that as we get further down the line, there will be roles that will change, but there will be roles that stay the same. And some of the fundamentals like brand building and really being true to how you get your brand out there, whether you're using traditional, whether you're going digital, whether you're taking your e-commerce to everywhere commerce or whatever that is, wherever your brand is at, some of the fundamentals remain, and you will still need those roles. The events one is probably a good example and a good question to ask. I do think that activations will continue. It may not be in the traditional sense, and right now we're living in in a digital activation space. I think we'll get a hybrid of those, and but that human connection part, it will come back, and it will come back in whatever form that is. So I do think that there is a role for brand experiences is probably bigger now than it was pre-COVID. The need to understand every single moment in that brand's life cycle and how to activate on that moment. So I think that in a traditional sense, yes, it's changed, but the need for it is still there. So I think that event managers will evolve into more experienced managers and so on.
It's certainly a time of change, Neo. I mean, how do you sort of, as the Chief Strategy Officer of Ogilvy, who's also watching the same addresses from the president, who's also finding out about stuff in real time, alongside your client, if they're an alcohol company, whatever it is, everyone's sort of finding out at the same time. How do you sort of get the lead and be the kind of go-to that people can say, well, this strategy is going to be a trusted one when something hasn't been around for that long? Or is it a case of saying, we actually all don't really know what's happening here, but we're just going to work together really collaboratively as client and as agency to navigate this together? Is there more collaboration now versus this us and them, which typically we know has defined advertising? If the agency doesn't really think that the logo change is great, no, the CMO thinks that's the new logo and that's what we're going with. But do you think that this is going to spark sort of a little bit more collaboration between sort of brands and their agencies moving into 2021? Because no one really knows anything.
I think if there's ever a call that sustained the industry of communication specialists, it's been the desire for partnership. And I think if there was a factor that mitigates how that partnership works out, is power and respect. And I think one of the critical things is that, it's best when you approach a problem with your entire brain as opposed to a partial one. So to lean alone on advertising agency is to use the intelligence of communication specialists. And if you don't engage and understand the business challenges that your client faces, is to literally go and create something that is artistic and beautiful, but is it touching consumers? If you ask me, how do we approach things? I literally have one value that I inspire in my team, and it's a value of curiosity and empathy together. So one of the critical things is, when we see what is happening in our world, we want to understand humanity as humans. So what is the South African landscape looking like? What are the cultural tensions? What is the impact of social distancing in an unequal society like ours, where people might understand social distancing, but it is impractical? What does it mean for them? And you start to understand how people will react to it. And we begin to take those kind of social cultural insight into the discussions with our clients. And when you start to see people who had a narrative of don't pay some of the debts in the beginning of lockdown, you understand that when our economy has gone through challenges like ours and is now in a decline, the expectation would be in the beginning of the year, what is it that I will not pay in order to survive? So you take those insights into the room and you start to talk about what is the impact of this in brand planning. So for a client who used to start the year saying, buy, what incentive do you give to consumers to buy? What do they get back from a human perspective? Those are the insights that you bring into the table to talk about the way our clients plan. So we bring the human side of the brain. I think Avik said that understanding humanity and culture is critical to marketing. And I think when I think about what Kaibe also said, he reflected on that. So how do we take the people of South Africa and bring them and their needs into the room, their connection points? And I think that is critical.
Kebe, much of the success of African Bank is attributed to understanding those needs and those cultural nuances and the way that different people want to sort of work with their money and what their relationship with their money is. How do you go about maintaining that competitive advantage? Because certainly it's very infused with what the success of African Bank has been. Maintaining that competitive advantage in a day and age where it is so different. How do you really genuinely keep on the pulse of what people are thinking and feeling and what those nuances are?
I think it's exactly what we've been discussing and what Neo has also just spoken about. If you do not have that connection with the consumer, and that connection talks to the understanding, the insight that comes from being part of that consumer's life, you'll get nowhere. So it's not just about, sometimes we observe things and we say we understand. but until you've actually got the insight, you don't know. So part of what we have to do is make sure that we've always got that insight, because the insight will help you know. And part of that insight, as I said, is living in the community, being part of the community, understanding what the needs of that community are, and making sure that you can then hopefully have a solution to whatever those needs are of that community. One of the things in South Africa that is critical is when we talk about culture, there is so much that also relates to language. Here we are, we're talking in English, and great, we'll say we all understand English and we can perhaps relate with concepts in English. Even this concept of social distancing, if you were to translate it into vernac, it becomes something else entirely. And how do you make sure that there is an understanding of what that is? Then when you take it back into somebody's life, where I live in a community where the houses are pretty much on top of each other. And then you say, how do I social distance in that world where there are more than, we might have very few number of rooms, and there are many of us in those few number of rooms. How do we social distance? And how does it make sense for me that you tell me when I'm away from home to social distance, but I won't be able to social distance when I come back home? So that is one part. And then, as I said earlier, then we have to really understand those needs and what those needs are about. So when lockdown started, you spoke about, or Neo spoke about, people had to make perhaps some choice as to what am I going to pay. So you have to, as a financial institution, come out and say, well, guess what, guys, there's credit life. Guess what, there are payment holidays. And guess what, here is some additional education so that you understand what are these things that you can access that you've actually already been paying for. You don't, it's not going to cost you any more or any less. You've already done it. And the reason why it was introduced in the first place was because it's exactly for situations like these, even though we wouldn't have known that this is the particular situation, but it's for situations like these. And then as you go on through the year, you have to say, okay, now does it still make sense to access it again? Because understand what the implications are if you access certain things, and what are the things that you might be thinking about now going forward. People are spending so much more time educating themselves, even if it's online. So do you have facilities, or do you have a product that allows for you to access funding, even if it's going to educate yourself? Because maybe you traditionally thought, I'll borrow because Christmas is coming up and I want to do a renovation and I want to fix up the house so that the family can come through. Yes, you can still do that, but now are you going to do it thinking differently? It's not just about renovating the home. It's also about maybe lifting your home so that you can have a side hustle that you also want to support and fund because of this new normal, as well as the new to be normal that we don't yet know. So it's definitely about insight, understanding, being part of the community, and being comfortable to play in everything that maybe hopefully you've traditionally played with, i.e. language, i.e. idiom, i.e. context, but still understand that we're all going into the path not traveled. So we still all are creating that new path to wherever we're going.
Kebe, I love that you're taking us inside the boardrooms of African Bank and the many challenges. As you speak about them, it starts, I get anxiety for you on all these challenges that you have every day as a marketer. I want to come to some of the questions that are coming through on the live chat. This is from Ashish and it's for Avik. Ashish says, when it comes to agility, which we have been hearing before COVID days, it's not a new term. Do you think agility has changed post-COVID or in this new normal? When it comes to adapting marketing structure, does it have a new definition now?
A good question, Ashish. I don't think the definition of agility has changed. It's just that the intent or the entire the weightage of agility has gone up. We obviously, as marketeers, we were agile in terms of adapting to new things and how quickly we change our plans, keeping in mind competition predominantly, or keeping in mind some of the amazing or massive consumer shifts that's taking place. We have never considered a massive external change that we are experiencing right now in terms of COVID. So agility, the definition remains the same. It's just that we need to ensure that whatever we do, and we are agile enough, keeping in mind the overall strategy of the brand. You can't go out of the entire brand positioning, or you can't go out of the entire brand idea. And also keeping in mind the cultural context of the consumer. So how do we link that and then move ahead in terms of being slightly agile on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and easily adapt that in your plans?
Great answer there. That question there was from Ashish. Danny, I want to come to you with a question from Brent Skiepers, and it's to do with Twitter. So you can put your "does Twitter help or like make the world a worse place" cap on quickly. The question is, while digital is becoming the dominant marketing channel, and again, we could unpack that statement for the next couple of weeks as well. But assuming that digital is going to become a digital marketing channel, do you see platforms such as Twitter not being a healthy channel to use to market to consumers based on the hostile environment that's on that platform? So within the context of digital, the intricacies of sort of the risk you open yourself up to there when you are on these kind of ungoverned platforms.
Yeah, I think also a very good question. I think there is, as marketers, we've said, there are so many challenges on every level. And, I think we have to use many channels to reach our consumers. I spoke about that, that commerce is becoming everywhere. Every channel, every social channel is becoming an opportunity to sell, to shop, to experience the brand. And to exclude some of them is risky because you might lose that opportunity. But what comes with that opportunity comes risk. And I think, Twitter as a channel hasn't really been used from a commerce perspective. It's been used as a news platform. It's obviously quite restrictive in how you can use it. And yeah, is it hostile? I suppose it depends on who you're following. I particularly enjoy my followers and enjoy their opinions and what they say. Some are even on this call. So I think you've just got to put the risks or mitigate the risks around each of them. I think Twitter is a support channel. That's my short answer. It's not a main channel. But as it evolves, I mean, like WhatsApp, for example, it's not quite there yet, but it's a massive, massive social channel for commerce going forward. Once everyone sort of understands how we can use it. So I wouldn't exclude it, but, I'd take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very strong sentiment. I mean, the idea of a brand sort of, and I mean, I think of, in the context of you, Vic, there's a beautiful bowl of cereal and then there's a Donald Trump tweet underneath. You kind of just have to figure out where is it that you want to play. I want to come to you with this question there. It's from Tessa, and it speaks very much to sort of research and strategy. Tessa asks, what role has market research going to play in making decisions, remarketing, and consumers during COVID? And what role do you see it playing in the future? And I want to add to that question, because research always, when I think of that word, I think of months to get this research. And, in this day and age, research almost has to be instantaneous, but are we geared towards instantaneous research?
Yeah. I do think this is very interesting because if you look at what happened to the industry during COVID is that there was an immediate impact on research houses, but research houses pivoted and they started doing, because many of them had started doing mobile research. So they actually started reaching out to those landscape, literally testing initial impact, what people are doing. And I think what Danny was talking about earlier was the role of social media in terms of commerce and the strength of social media in terms of commerce. But the other strength of social media is a platform where people express themselves. So when you actually look at the impressions and what people are saying as they go through the stages, you can actually see the lens of South Africans. So primary research houses do, and they can do it in 24 hours to 48 hours to give you initial sentiments. But I think the most critical thing is to actually always take a temperature check or a social check of how are South Africans dealing with anxiety? How are South Africans dealing with a contracting economy? So research plays a critical role because it gives us, I would love to understand that I understand South Africans, but I will want to say I will be curious and learn, because if I don't learn, I will be presumptuous, and therein lies the danger. So we need to constantly be alert to what's happening and use a mix of primary research, cultural assessment of the temperature check of South Africa, use specialists, and also make sure you're always alert that so when you look at data, you're able to read it and read it well.
Yeah, and I guess,
if I can just add something, and I agree so much with what Nao says, because I think part of what perhaps we used to do in the past is we'd say research happens at points in time. We'll go and access research now to see what has happened. One of the things that I think, to what I agree Neo's talking about, and what is happening, especially now that there is so much more online and digital research, is we are able to have tracking studies, always on tracking, that doesn't just say we can only go and look in retrospect what has happened. We can actually look quite regularly as not only what has happened, what is happening, so that, to Neo's point, we are much more on the ball. Because the fact that, at some stage we had lockdown changes month to month, and economy opens a little bit, and times change a little bit, and so many more people can access, and then it's 70% in the taxi versus 100% in the taxi, and windows open versus... So all of these things that change so regularly, you have to know, how is that impacting the consumer? How is it impacting their headspace, their emotions, in terms of that anxiety or in terms of that attitude? And be able to say, okay, how are we dealing with this in relation to what we are currently communicating or putting out there as propositions to that consumer? So I'm 100% aligned.
I love that we're talking about research, because it lends itself to quite a nice sort of topic of conversation, which is sort of the balance between research and gut, and how you as a CMO are led. I mean, Danny, when you think about how you as a CMO are led, how important is the data and how important is the new idea? And over and above that, everyone says, well, fail fast and it's fine to fail and that kind of thing. But, at the end of the day, you don't want to fail. And sometimes it's easier to go the sort of data-led route. But where do you start drawing that line, and how do you think it's shifting as the world is shifting?
Yeah, I am, I have an advertising background, and for me, the role of analytics, the role of data, the ROI, I worked for a bank before, I worked with a lot of money guys. Those are all really, really important. But at the heart of everything that we do, I think creativity rules, and potentially that's where the gut conversation comes in, and brave creativity. And I think that's what makes great work. So some of the, and long-term brand understanding, I think that's where your gut comes in, because as CMOs, as marketers, you should have a very clear idea of and destination of where your brand is going and what that looks like and the impact that you want to make in the world. And all the analytics and RI and data and all of that just helps inform potentially the route that you're taking. Talk about brand being a marathon, and then you do these short sprints, the little tactics. That's where you learn and fail and grow, and use Twitter, don't use Twitter. That's that opportunity. But the destination ultimately remains the same. And how you get to that destination is through great work, and how you get to great work is through great creativity. And great creativity is backed behind the great insights that you have to the conversation earlier. So, and your gut feel tells you whether you're on that mark or not. So I think you have to use your gut, and as CMOs, it's probably the most critical thing that you use on a daily basis.
And perhaps the most scary thing as well, because you open yourself up to, the possibility of failure. But I mean, when we look at brands differentiating themselves, I think you have an incredible heritage brand, Kellogg's. I mean, in South Africa, that brand is massive. It's been with us it's been with us for my entire life and probably many years beyond that. It's an iconic brand. It's a heritage brand. But talk to me about keeping it fresh and relevant and data and gut and this massive mix of things that you have to do to get people to pick yours off the shelf.
Interesting point. I think what drives any brand, it's not about Kellogg's. I think any brand in any country for that matter is the purpose, right? Now, how can consumers, or why is a consumer connecting with that brand at a personal level? Now, it's a simple question. If I ask the consumer, okay, tomorrow I'm going to remove Kellogg's from your life, or tomorrow I'm going to remove Coca-Cola from your life, will your life change? Now, if the consumer says yes, this means that you have done something great and that the purpose because of which the consumer is buying you. If the answer is no, then it means that it's a very rational relationship that you have with consumer. And the way any brand evolves, and there's so many examples that we have in front of us in South Africa or in Asia or in Africa or globally, there's a certain heritage and a certain journey that each and every brand has traveled. Now, if I talk about Kellogg's in South Africa, if I correctly remember, we are there in South Africa for the past 90 years. And now that's a massive journey that the brand has taken, right? And that's the reason people, and Kaibe was also talking about his love for that brand before the conversation started, right? And I remember Courtney was also talking about it. Now, it's not about what the brand speaks. It is about how and the purpose with which the brand is trying to talk with the consumer. Now that is what we should do, and I think Neo will agree to what I'm saying. And it's not about being an agency partner. I think all of us, anybody, and I fundamentally believe that anybody who's touching the brand, be it supply chain, be it the agency partners, be it marketing, or be it sales for that matter, are custodian of those brands. And everyone has the right to speak up and say that how can this brand bring purpose to me and in my life? And therefore the insight becomes very important. And in a transactional way, what is the value that I'm getting out of it? Right? It is not about the 50 rand a product or the 30 rand a product or 100 rand a product. It is the value that I'm getting if I pay 50 rand across the counter. Now that becomes important. And therefore, what is the benefit? What is the reason? What is the emotional hook that the consumer is speaking becomes far more important than saying, you buy this, you get this free, or you buy this brand and you get X, Y, Z benefit.
I mean, it's very interesting in a time of kind of what many will call economic crisis, with contraction figures that hit the double digits, that there is such a strong focus this year around this word purpose and brands going back to basics and actually figuring out, well, what is it that we stand for and what is it that we are about? I mean, does this ring true with everybody? I mean, we have a broad spectrum of brands on this call here. We have a cereal brand, we have a banking brand. Does it ring true for everybody? Because sometimes, people will argue and say, well, actually, it is about if something's 10 Rand or 9 Rand when the economy is contracting. But Kaibe, would you agree that the purpose is fundamental? Do you think that people sort of look to that and feel that before they really make a decision?
Absolutely. I agree 100% with what Avik has been saying. And one of the things that, to what you said, we learned in Marketing 101 is that if you have a functional relationship with consumers or with your customers, then they will buy you at that point that they need you. As soon as you have more of an emotional relationship with your customers or consumers, even when times are tough, they'll still come back to you first. So for me, it is absolutely about what your purpose is in terms of how does that align with what the consumer's purpose is. So if the consumer feels that I need a brand that feels for me, that understands me, that is willing to walk with me wherever I'm going and help me get to where I need to get to, you've already got a head start on anybody else coming in, because there's a piece of that consumer's heart that you have connected with that will allow them to almost negate the rational decision. They will have started with the emotional decision and then rationalize that emotional decision. Whereas if all you've got is a rational relationship, then there's nothing else to hang on to if the rational goes out the window. So purpose is critical, and part of that purpose has to be authentic. You can't suddenly come across and say, oh, because it's now COVID, I am for you, the consumer, whereas you have been hitting me with charges for the past 20, 30 years. And I know you've been hitting me with those charges for the past 20, 30 years. It has to be authentic. It has to be that the consumer and your customer is able to say, yes, but you've always been doing this, and that's why I'm staying with you, even while others are changing their prices or are changing their colors or are changing their names of their products. I'm sticking with you because you've been there with me from the beginning, and you've always been about me first and you second.
I mean, it's an interesting...
Sorry, yeah, just to say that, whilst we're talking about COVID and 2020 and what this has brought us, I think we're actually moving into a post-purpose era now. So whereas we're speaking a lot about purpose and from a consumer point of view, I think we've moved into purpose that speaks more to being society awareness and what that means to be a brand in society that lives within that space. And I think Nero mentioned it earlier. I mean, the role of activism and really understanding what it means to be an empathetic human brand or a diverse brand or an inclusive brand or, any of those things, an environmental brand. The post-purpose work that has sort of the reflection work that had to happen this year is massive. And I think we're going to see that, purpose is going to go into a whole new era. The kind of work that we're going to see in the next 24 months is going to look very different. So I think brands that didn't have their purpose in place pre this have really had to do a lot of work, whereas brands that were quite established and had a strong foundation were very quick off the mark. So you look at the Nike brand or any of those brands where they were able to express themselves in any kind of situation and really connect deeply. So I think purpose is still, it's still really big and it's a really big challenge. But how we evolve into that, and what I mean by post-purpose is that it's no longer marketing. It now lives within the company. Every action of the company is being measured. So yeah.
Danny, almost, yeah.
Sorry, Arye, it's a very interesting subject, this one. I think what we actually saw when #Black Lives Matter happened in New York and how nations around the world congregated and expected activism from brands, but expected credible activism. So I think where in the past purpose used to be about, I'm broadcasting, I am for you, I am telling you that I'm for you, but my deeds did not follow through. And purpose has always been such a large subject. A few years ago, Neville Isdell, who used to be the former CEO of Coca-Cola, and I think Procter & Gamble, they started talking about purpose on a larger scale, but it was never realized. Neville Isdell called it connected capitalism. And that was the adjustment for Coca-Cola. When Coca-Cola used to look at the role of the product, water, as something we do for society. They brought it back and they said, actually, 90% of our product is water. If we don't take care of water, we don't have our product. And then that moved into the Chief Growth Officer and the CMO's role, because we care for water, for our society, for our communities, for our supply chain, but also as part of our products. So I think what's going to happen in 2021 is when brands start to actually see what impacts society, impacts their supply chain, their bottom line, and we become much more activist about purposeful brand work. And it's not about telling people what you do. It's about what you do as part of that purpose. And we've started to see brands doing different things, but we are going to have to build our economy and our society together. And that's the role of purpose.
I mean, it's certainly, yeah, it really is getting interesting, this discussion. And when we bring words like purpose to the table, it certainly starts to put a different spin on things. Nikki says on the live chat, love these discussions, always learn so much. Always nice to see that even the big guys are in the same boat with all these challenges, which make me feel less disheartened. And as we begin to land this, I mean, we're sitting now on the 6th of October. We know that it's, you know, the fundamental of October, November, and sort of the first half of December being ridiculously busy is going to ring true this year, because we can already feel it, that it's this countdown towards the end of the year. We're not really sure what we're counting down to, because we know deep down that on the 31st of December, COVID doesn't just go away. These social issues don't just go away. In fact, you know, they come back on the 1st of January, sometimes more in our face and more part of our lives than they were before. But you know, to get through these next 2.5 months, because I think that we can only take this kind of one day at a time. What are each of you kind of channeling to push through to make each day as successful as possible, to be aware of the 3 A's of agility, adaptability, and ambiguity? How are you kind of, you know, finding the energy to push through until the end of the year, knowing that you're going to start a new year, knowing less than you did the year before? I mean, I know that I just want this American election to end. I just want this rhetoric to go away. I just want, you know, these tweets to stop happening. But what are you channeling, each of you, to make it to the end of the year, and successfully, because you still want to thrive?
So if I can tell you what's top of mind for me, because for us, our fiscal has just started. So our fiscal started on the 1st of October. And so this is first quarter of the year for us. There are two as opposed to AVIX A's. For me, it's 2 R's, and we've spoken about one of them, relevance. But the first one, which is very, very critical, is resonance. And for me, that is the most critical thing. We need to resonate. And to what Nell was just saying about resonating with our consumers is critical above everything else. And part of that resonance is also identifying the movement and the platform that people are looking at. Because again, those are the big things, but also bring them back here. And to one of the things that also Nell said about authenticity. And I'm going to use this example because, this is a safe space. One of the things that for me is critical is our national rugby team. We had our heads of the organization saying the national rugby team will not take a knee. They will still wear their shirts that say we have this transformation thing and. And for me, that was actually very authentic for the wrong reason. It was authentic for me because they've actually, to me, haven't really shown that intent to say that they completely subscribe to the thought that BLM, even the appointment of the captain of the national team, a lot of people were sort of, oh, this is quite convenient as we're going into a World Cup year. Maybe it is a way of trying to garner that support that you otherwise weren't getting from the masses of the country. And because now it's World Cup time, and hey, let's all get together. Let's pretend that we've been singing Kumbaya all this time. Let's get behind the box, and it's going to be wonderful. And hey, the box came back, and they won the World Cup. And suddenly, you see, this was the beginning of our journey together, and all is great and well. And yet, if it was authentic, part of that real transformation and part of that understanding of what are the movements and the platforms that are currently occupying the bulk of the country's life, that will resonate and have absolute relevance for those consumers, I think that decision might have been slightly different. So it will be interesting to see what happens when the soccer season comes back. What will happen there? The netball ladies are going to be doing stuff in a bubble. Again, we haven't seen what their intentions are. So for me, there's that is sort of how big is this platform or this movement here going into this last quarter of the year, going into a time when we talk about either end of year or holiday or festive or all these things that, you know, suddenly say, oh, this is great and this is wonderful. What are those things that perhaps are going to be brought in and are going to be top of mind for consumers that are critical? And for me, as long as what we do as a brand has relevance and resonance with the consumer, at least then I think we'll be on a solid wicket.
Now, pushing through to the end of the year, clients looking at you to deliver double time and not entirely sure what they want you to deliver. How are you approaching these last couple of months of the year and moving into 2021?
I think clients are going to try and look for growth. What is important is to understand the landscape and the avenues for growth, and to actually reflect. For me, it's going to be a learning year, to be honest. I think, maybe to go back, I want to quote Danny earlier on, and I just want to figure out if I'm going to quote her right, where she spoke about the power of creativity, the balance between creativity and research. And David Ogilvy once said that, we mustn't use research like a drunkard uses a lamppost to lean on, but we must use it for illumination. And so my take on this quarter of the year in readiness for 2020 is learning. Understanding what economically the landscape is going to look like, understanding what our clients are going to focus on and hold back on so that they can gain goals, understanding where the consumers are at, and the cultural landscape of South Africa. So for me, I am very eager to learn, and also to quote Vic, agility, learn as you go, risk, test, and replay. So readiness is just understanding a lot more, but willing to take risks and then test as you go. That will be my take for next year and prepping for it.
Vic, let me come to you. You have a big team. We work with some of them, Aaron, Tamsin, some fantastic people at Kellogg's SA. How are you leading these people into 2021, and what approach are you taking?
I think the only thing which I keep telling them, and I fundamentally believe in that, and there's just one thing, nothing to do with the brand strategy or the plans or the financials, nothing. So it's a simple word we all believe in, KISS, K-I-S-S. Keep it straight and simple. That's it. So whatever you do, just keep it straight, keep it simple. Consumers are simple people. They don't like complicated things. Don't overcomplicate. Keep it straight, keep it simple, things will happen. And the most important, trust yourself, stick to the fundamentals. That's it.
And Danny, let's land it with you. We asked the question at the top of this panel discussion, CMOs, what's next? It's a big question. So Danny Dixon, what is next?
Like I said earlier, I think we are going to see the kind of storytelling and work of brands evolve, and kind of the role that brands are playing in people's lives. And I don't think we must underestimate just how powerful marketing is in that role in society and the stories that we do tell. And we have a huge responsibility. There's another R. There's reflecting, reviewing, readiness, responsibilities that we have. And we do have that responsibility to ensure, and that's what we can control. So to KB's earlier point, there are things that happen at national sports team that give me anxiety, but I ask myself, well, what can I control? And I can control the work that I do, the people that I work with, the agencies, the partners, the total process. I can control the kind of impact that brands can make in the world, and how brands are reflected and the stories that we tell to make the world a better place, to make society more, representative. So that's what's next for me, is continue to love what I do and have a positive impact with the brands that I have the privilege of working with. So, and make a big, like I said, big impact. It's really cool. We do great things.
Absolutely. And certainly, I think when we start looking at the work that's come out of this year and that'll come out of next year, some incredible creativity that produces some incredible data, and those two elements of advertising and marketing working kind of hand in hand. What an incredible panel. Thank you so much to everyone this morning watching us live on the Arena Events and Financial Mail Redzone page. The topic was CMOs in Conversation, What's Next? If you missed any of this conversation, you can catch up on the Arena Events website and also on their page on Facebook and on Twitter. A special thank you to our guests this morning, Danny Dixon, Consulting Chief Marketing Officer, Vic Sarkar, Marketing Director at Kellogg South Africa, Kayebe Molo, Head of Marketing at African Bank, and Neo Makele, Chief Strategy Officer, Ogilvy. All these people have many Zooms to get through today. Some of them may or may not pop into the office. I don't know how brave you're feeling, how much hand sanitizer you want on your hands. But certainly when we look at the caliber of panelists this morning and consider the state of the South African media and marketing industry, I think we can find comfort in knowing that there's people on the other end of the Zoom line, sitting in their living rooms with their kids running back and forth, really actually shaping a powerful 2021. It's been a crazy year, and I know that one can always say that a year has been crazy, but I really, really feel this year's been different than others. So thank you so much to our panel, and we'll see you all again soon for our next Red Zone in Conversation with. Thanks so much and goodbye.